roughly, what, about 30 or so metres that way.
That's incredible. And you think, I mean, they say it won't be covered up until November, and there are still bits falling off it and landing on the ground.
Yes, exactly. There are still bits falling off it, you know, they won't cover that up until November. However, I'm sure they're trying to cover up their responsibility for this as we speak.
My name's Rachel, I'm a journalist with LBC. Do you know that seeking sex instead of rent is a sexual offence?
I wasn't aware of that, no.
You weren't?
No.
But it is.
I wasn't aware of that.
So what do you have to say for yourself for this meeting you're having here today?
I wasn't aware that I was doing something that was breaking the law.
You didn't think there was a problem with exploiting women?
No, the lady who you call Gemma contacted me yesterday.
She contacted you about an advert that you posted, seeking sex in exchange of rent, which is a sexual offence. I want to know how you justify this. You're walking out of the coffee shop now. How do you justify what you're doing? Because we know you've done this before as well. You're not saying anything? You're not saying anything? We're outside now? You don't want to say anything in your defence? You don't want to try and justify this? Do you want to apologise? Because we know you've done this before. You can stay silent, that's fine. I'll just keep walking.
And she will. Crikey, Rachel Venables there, who at tea time today becomes our former colleague here at LBC, and Sky News very, very lucky to have her. Thanks, Rachel. Time now for the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
Ukraine's interior minister is among 18 people killed in a helicopter crash in Kyiv. 3 children are among the victims after the aircraft came down in foggy conditions close to a nursery. All police forces have been asked to check their officers and staff against national police databases. The Home Office says it hopes to identify anyone who has slipped through the net in the wake of the case of PC David Carrick. Tube and bus fares across London will increase by 5.9% from March, in line with national increases. The city's mayor will also put up council tax by £15 for a typical Bandy property to invest in policing. LBC weather, sleet and snow showers for northern and western areas this afternoon. Largely dry and bright elsewhere, highs of 6 degrees.
This is LBC.
We've got it at Selco. Selco is where the trade goes.
At Selco Builders Warehouse, we've got real deals on a wide range of trade quality building products. This month, we've got 4x2 sawn treated easy edge timber for only £1.75 per metre ex VAT. Now that's a real deal. Find even more real deals at Selco Builders Warehouse and online at selcobw.com.
We've got it at Selco. Selco is where the trade goes.
That charged the 20%.
Deep breath and relax.
Forget work-life balance. What about your news-life balance? When the news becomes the noise, try The Week magazine for a calmer insight on what matters. Concisely edited from over 200 trusted global news sources, it's all you need to know about everything that matters, with your first 6 issues free. Then auto-renews for $38.99 a quarter, cancel anytime. Possibly the most balanced view available, without standing on one leg. Search The Week, free. Experience. It's knowing that Saga Travel Insurance has your back wherever you go. With Saga, you're covered for up to £10 million of emergency medical expenses. You can relax in an airport lounge if your flight is delayed by over an hour. Plus, receive same-day payments when making a claim. Simply search Saga Over 50s Travel Insurance for a quote today. Saga Travel Insurance. Experience is everything.
Same-day payments made if approved before 4 p.m. UK time. Register your flight 6 hours before departure. Provided by Astrentica Insurance Limited.
Running a successful business comes with many different challenges, but right now the need for good business advice is more important than ever. At Barnes Rofe Accountants, we are helping our clients adapt their business strategies by looking at the best ways to build resilience in an ever-changing world. To arrange a free consultation with one of our partners and find out how we can support you and your business, visit barnesrofe.com. Barnes Rofe, clever accountants for business.
Here are the words every timeshare owner will be dreading to hear. Your 2023 timeshare maintenance fees are due. If you own a timeshare, you need to consider whether it's a good investment. MyTimeshareClaim.co.uk has helped thousands of owners who were missold exit their contract and receive compensation. If you bought a timeshare after 5th of January 1999, text timeshare to 78900. That's timeshare to 78900 to find out more.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Are there any more terrifying words in the English language than the brainchild of Jacob Rees-Mogg? I'm not sure there are, but it is a description that I think fairly well fits the so-called retained EU law bill, which is before Parliament today. We'll speak in a moment to the Chief Executive Officer of the Wildlife Trust about how it is likely to impact his patch. But as we often do on matters Brexity, we'll turn first to Peter Foster, the Public Policy Editor of the Financial Times, and we'll ask him the question that we often ask him. What's going on, Pete?
How long have you got, James? No, listen, this is quite simple, which is that when we were an EU member for about 40 years, an awful lot of rules and regulations that make the world go round, we agreed with the EU, because remember we had a common rule book with the EU. So lots of things that cover everything from consumer rights to environmental rights, public procurement, insolvency, working time, paying conditions. I mean, I could go on and on, all derived from EU laws. And now we're outside the EU. We're free to change those laws as we see fit. Now that bit is sensible and easy. What this bill does is say that we need to run the rule over all of those laws. That's at least 4,000, but actually the government doesn't know how many there are. And we need to do it by the end of the year. And a lot of people are saying, and that's trade unionists, business, environmental groups, lawyers, are saying this is mad. Of course we can review some laws and change them because they might be better for our economy, but doing it all by the end of 2023 is just going to blow up Whitehall, cause massive uncertainty, and, you know, lots of this law, if it's not all reviewed or revoked according to this legislation, will simply drop off the statute book, and we don't know what it'll be replaced with, and it'll be chaos. So everyone is saying, take a step back here, let's go slowly, let's go methodically, but Jacob Rees-Mogg, well, that's not the way he wants to do it.
Well, he's not in charge anymore, though. They set up a ministry, didn't they, for him to find Brexit benefits, and he didn't find any, and they shut the ministry down again. This looks like revenge, or almost as if, having failed to find any really meaningful or substantive benefits of Brexit, this is a sort of a scorched earth. Well, let's just abolish everything then, and call that a win.
You know, so you're right, Jacob Rees-Mogg is no longer in power, and this is a sort of hangover from the Liz Truss administration. But you might remember during the election campaign over the summer, James, Rishi Sunak had that video where he was sitting there with his shredder saying, I'm going to shred all EU law in 100 days. You know, anything Liz can do, I can do better. And this is the problem for Sunak, is that he must know this is frankly a pretty nonsense way to carry out what is, you know, a really complicated and important business. But he's trapped, A, by what he said in the past, and B, by the kind of Brexity wing of the party, which, as you say, is desperate to try and find Brexit benefits. I mean, it's pretty clear that, you know, trade has been impacted negatively by Brexit. So the crock of gold at the end of the rainbow is, well, we can deregulate and we can be more productive and we can outflank the EU by having lighter touch regulation. The trouble is, that's not what business wants. Business wants continuity.
They're making that pretty clear, aren't they? I mean, who can put the brakes on this, if anyone?
Well, I mean, so one thing you could do is, if you accept that Sunak's too weak to stop the legislation, one thing you could do is increase the length of the sunset clause. So there is a clause in the bill that says that really complicated bits don't need to be reviewed or revoked by 2026. So if you extended that sunset clause to the entire corpus of retained EU law, inherited EU law, that would obviously give everybody more breathing space. It still creates a lot of uncertainty for companies, James, because regulation is what makes the world go round. Like it or loathe it, it's what keeps our food safe, it's what keeps our roads safe, it's what keeps our rivers clean, etc., etc. So if you're then going to say to business, all of that is up for grabs, then business needs to know, well, which bit of it is up for grabs? It has to spend money horizon scanning, you know, so that it's ahead of the game and knows what's coming. And all of that is cost and drag. It's not Brexit benefit, because actually the UK economy, contrary to what you might hear from Brexiters like Jacob Rees-Mogg, is actually by OECD standards, pretty low regulation.
Yes.
Right? We're not a super high regulation economy compared to many others of our advanced economy competitors. So it's not obvious that there's masses of low-hanging fruit. There are things you might want to do, of course. But this is building in uncertainty, and uncertainty in business means cost, and it means lack of investment. Because if you're going to invest, you want to know what the rules of the road are.
That's beautifully put, as always. Just in conclusion, not a quibble as such, but it wasn't just that we agreed with EU law. We were integral in making much of this law. The United Kingdom would have been a very big presence at the table where these regulations were written, particularly in fields like environment and protections, and most of it is framed to protect punters, isn't it? I mean, or not most of it, because there's 4,000 odd bits of law there, but this is stuff that most people, if it was explained to them objectively, would think, I quite like that. Actually, that's quite good for me. It means my boss can't do this, or it means that if X happens, then Y will follow. It's bizarre that they're just setting fire to all of it.
No, indeed, and there was back in another part of my life, James. I used to live in China. You actually don't know what's in the food. You don't know whether the regulations are being properly observed. You don't know what you're feeding your kids. We take a lot of that for granted. But actually, when you buy a product in the UK or when you buy something from the supermarket, you do fundamentally trust that it does what it says on the tin, that it's safe, it's being properly regulated, and therefore plunging all of that into uncertainty doesn't help anybody. And as you say, I mean, this legislation was something that we had a hand in creating, and ironically, part of this bill says that ministers, it gives them what they call Henry VIII powers. Ministers basically, when a piece of legislation goes off the cliff, can then replace it with whatever they like, effectively, which is actually less democratic, has less scrutiny than we had when we were members of the European Union. We sat on the European Council, we were involved in the European Commission bureaucracy formulating these laws. Now, they weren't always perfect. Sure. They really weren't. When you're making one set of rules for 28 economies, there's clearly areas where you'd want to change them, and we're free to do that.
That was always the point. So, I mean, in conclusion then, Pete Foster of the Financial Times, more red tape and less democracy, but everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. I mentioned environmental protections, I mentioned wildlife. Craig Bennett, the CEO of the Wildlife Trust, is with us. Is Pete exaggerating? Are things as bad as he suggests on your patch?
No, I think they're worse, James. I think they're far worse. Bear in mind, we're talking well over 1,000 bits of environment legislation that we're talking about here. And as of today, the law going through the Commons, and it's the final stages of it going through the Commons here before it goes to the Lords, will mean that over 1,000 bits of environment legislation and regulations cease to exist on December the 31st this year. Now, DEFRA is saying, don't worry, giving assurances, obviously we'll keep some of the important ones, but they haven't yet told us which ones they keep and which ones they get rid of. They don't actually have a clue.
Well, you preempted my question. How feasible is it that they are caught up in this sort of ideological brain fever, and they don't actually have much, which you could use as a description of Brexit in general, but they haven't got much of an understanding of what the real world implications will be, quite literally on the ground.
They haven't got a clue. You've got to bear in mind that when the government first published this bill, they thought it would relate to 2,400 bits of legislation, and then the National Archives found another 1,400 that the government didn't know about. As of today, the government doesn't even know how many bits of legislation this relates to, and yet they're proposing to get rid of all of these by default by the end of this year. And it's fundamentally anti-democratic. It will give the power to ministers to make the decision as to whether to keep or get rid of existing UK legislation. It should not be ministers that have that power. It should be Parliament and only Parliament. And on top of that, James, this is disastrous for devolution, because the environment is one of those issues that is devolved to Scotland, Scottish Government, to the Welsh Government, to the Northern Ireland Government. So no surprises, the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government are hopping mad about
because
this.
They're just being ignored.
Because they're being ignored, it will be taken away, and they're going to have to use loads of their own parliamentary time in the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government to put it back in. But it's even worse for Northern Ireland, because of course there's no government in Northern Ireland at the moment. It's unlikely there will be one for the rest of this year. So that means all of this environment legislation, all of this legislation where it applies to Northern Ireland will cease to exist in Northern Ireland by the end of this year. And my colleagues, over the last week, we've asked officials in DEFRA. I was in number 10 yesterday asking officials, well, what are you going to do about the Northern Ireland thing? They don't have an answer.
Well, that's an echo again, isn't it, of the whole referendum debate where people insisted that the Good Friday Agreement wouldn't be in any way compromised or jeopardised by leaving the customs union and the single market, and yet here we all are. What are you most worried about, Craig? I mean, in terms of things my listeners might just sort of be struck by.
There's two answers to that question, because in a way we're most worried about the fundamental underpinning of protections for the environment in this country, things like the Water Framework Directive that tries to reduce pollution going into our rivers and into our beaches. Now we'd like to see that massively strengthened, and actually it needs to be strengthened, and the problem is in the UK we haven't probably enforced what we've got anyway, so it's not like we're against any change here, but at the moment, the government, potentially it could fall without the government even knowing what replaces it. Or our habitats and species directives, which protect our best wildlife sites. You were talking before about how often these are being developed by the UK. Do you know who wrote those ones? Boris Johnson's dad, Stanley Johnson. He wrote the habitats and species directives, but those will fall by the wayside at the end of this year.
You live and learn.
And unless the government decides to keep them. Now, for those big flagship ones, probably DEFRA will give a reassurance. Yes, we will keep them.
Probably is not. You can't take probably to the bank, can you?
No, we certainly can't. But in a way, the ones we're most worried about are the ones we don't know. As I said, we're talking over 1,000 bits of environment legislation. No one, DEFRA, the Wildlife Trust, none of us really know the full list at the moment.
So I've got this image now, thanks to you and Peter Foster. I've got this image of a sort of junction box of wires on a system that's operating quite well. Okay?
Yeah.
And because the junction box was built in Brussels, even though British engineers were absolutely intrinsic. I know you listen to the programme, you'll be familiar with my analogies. They do end. Because it was built in Brussels, Jacob Rees-Mogg is pulling all the wires out of it.
Absolutely.
And obviously some of those wires are going to have to be plugged back in, and they're going to have to get expert engineers to come in and do it because of the damage that he's done. But he doesn't know what some of those wires do. So, some of those wires could be ejector seats, some of those wires could... That's the worry here, particularly in...
And no one's even begun to design what the new junction box is, with a big Union Jack on it. So here's the thing, surely even a 5-year-old could work out that if you want to get rid of existing legislation and regulations, the sensible thing to do is to work out what the alternative is that replaces it before you take away the existing stuff.
We're back to Brexit flipping, and it's like buying a car. You don't drive your old car to the blooming garage forecourt and set fire to it and then say, right, we're here to negotiate for a new car.
But James, there's a couple of things that make it even worse, if you can bear with this. There's also a clause in the bill that says that any new regulations and legislation that's introduced cannot add to the cost of business. So that would mean if in the 1960s or something you were an asbestos manufacturer, and government brings in rules to ban asbestos, that could now not be done under this bill. So we cannot bring in new laws or regulations now that will somehow add cost to business. The other thing that's bad about this is the vast majority of Conservative MPs don't understand this at all. We've had conversations in the last few weeks where they say, well, this will be good to be clear of the European courts. We're already clear of the European courts. This law became UK law in 2018. It's a fabrication, this language, EU retained law. It is UK law fundamentally. So, but also one of my colleagues was speaking to an MP, for example, just before Christmas. We shared our concerns with her, and she said, oh, well, don't worry, I'm sure it won't be in the King's Speech. She didn't realise that she'd already voted in support of this bill. She thought we were talking about something in the future. So the problem we have at the moment... I'm not going to say who it was. The problem we have at the moment is the vast majority of backbench MPs, Conservative backbench MPs, are sort of marching like automatons behind Jacob Rees-Mogg, basically doing whatever he or the government tells them to do, without putting their thinking caps on.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it, but thank you for shining a light into... Well, we've barely touched on food as well, which isn't quite your purview, but I mean, it's going to be quite interesting to see. For example, pet food now under European Union law must be safe for human consumption in case your toddler crawls across the kitchen floor and has a mouthful of pedigreed chum. So what is going to happen? And that won't be a legal requirement anymore come December the 31st. Craig Bennett from the Wildlife Trust, thank you very much indeed. You did this thing where you answered 3 questions before I'd asked them, which is brilliant for me. I mean, I could take the rest of the day off. So as you were speaking, I thought of what my next question was going to be, and then you answered it before I got away.
It's lovely to be here, James.
It's a pleasure to have you, and we'll do it again. 12:48 is the time. I've got a treat for you next. There are so many podcasts coming out of this building now, it's impossible to keep up, but one of them has garnered quite a lot of attention, quite a lot of praise and quite a lot of warmth. So I'll be introducing you to the husband and wife presenters of said podcast after this.
Coming up at 1, Sheila Fogarty, leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC.
During the Air France rendezvous, take advantage of great offers. Whoa. Until the 25th of January, book your flight to St. Martin from £586 or Osaka from £779 from London via Paris, return including tax. Fly with Air France, voted Western Europe's best airline for the 2nd year running by Skytrax. Elegance is a journey. Air France. To book and for terms and conditions, visit airfrance.co.uk.
With business, you're like, this is it, I've got it licked, I know what I'm doing. And then you walk around the corner and you get punched in the face because you just aren't expecting that next thing.
Sage members, like Jamie, can manage any unexpected surprises with our helpful business tools and advice from real experts. Sage, helping business flow.
Whether it's a home to grow up in or a place to grow old, our home is the stage where our lives unfold. From your forever home or your very first place, to up or downsizing to get the perfect space. Life doesn't wait, and neither should we. If it's the right home, then it's just meant to be. If you're thinking about your next move, get in touch with your local Savills agent to book a valuation.
Hello, Sue Perkins here, and I've teamed up once again with the Lego Group to bring you Series 2 of my podcast, At Your Leisure. This season we'll be going on more nostalgic journeys through hobbies, pastimes and passions. Tune in and catch my conversations with pop star Sophie Ellis-Bextor, Formula One Netflix star Will Buxton, actor, writer and comedian Babatunde Aleshe, and many more. Listen to the At Your Leisure podcast with me, Sue Perkins, on Global Player.
It's great being a new dad, although it's not been easy. My wife was a natural, feeding him, settling him, where I was asking myself if I was doing anything right. Then I found out I could speak to Bupa about how I've been struggling. They helped me find someone to talk to. I'm getting there. I love being a dad. With Bupa Health Insurance, we'll help you find support for your mental health. Bupa. This is health. Pre-existing conditions not covered.
We got it at Selco. Selco is where the trade goes.
At Selco Builders Warehouse, we've got real deals on a wide range of trade quality building products. This month, we've got 20% off the trade price of all rapid plus self-assembly kitchen units. Now that's a real deal. Find even more real deals at Selco Builders Warehouse and online at selcobw.com.
We got it at Selco. Selco is where the trade goes.
That charged the 20%.
At PensionBee, we're building a pension company you can believe in. Be pension confident. Join at pensionbee.com. Capital at risk, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Deep breath and relax.
Forget work-life balance. What about your news-life balance? When the news becomes the noise, try The Week magazine for a calmer insight on what matters. Concisely edited from over 200 trusted global news sources, it's all you need to know about everything that matters, with your first 6 issues free. Then auto-renews for $38.99 a quarter, cancel any time. Possibly the most balanced view available, without standing on one leg. Search The Week, free.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:52 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Expect lengthy rants, showbiz stories dating from the 1960s to the present day, and an authentic look into the Whitehall family home. Here's a little taste.
I like oak furniture, but pale. I don't like
what's known as
mahogany.
brown furniture.
Brown furniture.
Yeah.
It used to be very fashionable.
You know what they say? That the bottom's gone out of brown furniture.
Yes, I think they do say that. I think that's a very, very good way of putting it, Hillary, that the bottom has gone out of brown furniture. Which just pausing now for effect.
Who are they as well? Who are these people saying that? I don't know who they
There
are.
would be people on a bus. They're going along in a bus, and she's saying, you know, the bottom's gone out of brown furniture.
I think it's that the bottom's fallen out of brown furniture. Oh dear.
Brown furniture.
The Wittering Whitehall's a global podcast featuring Michael and Hilary Whitehall. Michael, you will know from travels with my father, of course, with his son, with their son Jack, which was broadcast on Netflix. And Hilary, you are introduced to really via the podcast. Where did the idea come from, Hilary?
Me, I think.
As indeed with all good things in our life. Michael Whitehall.
It definitely can.
Because you're
Why
very
are you suggesting you
Well, you're very up to speed on podcasts. Do you even know how to access a podcast?
No.
What are your favourite podcasts, Michael?
I love all your work. Anything you do, I love.
There's too many to mention.
There are.
4 million apparently. 4 million
4 million, we were told just now, just to cheer us up.
Yeah.
And you know this already, but people listening won't. Your podcast was brought to my attention by my 14-year-old daughter, which is well, it is it's a remarkable thing, because it wouldn't automatically strike people as something that would appeal to 14-year-old girls.
No, although of course our USP, not that you,
sure,
is that we give advice to people.
Yes.
Including 14-year-old daughters, actually, about how to deal with their recalcitrant fathers, which I'm sure your daughter probably needs some advice on, doesn't she?
You wouldn't believe. So people can email in to ask questions, pose problems, request help with anything they wish, and you provide some very sage and sensible advice. What's your role, Michael?
I do a little bit of ranting about things. I gather you occasionally do that too.
It has been known.
My ranting is more of
It's a bit noisier than James's.
It's quite noisy.
Yours is quite
noisy
measured,
ranting.
whereas his...
I think the problem with me is I'm 82, so I've been kind of around, since the early 1940s, and
you know a thing or two.
Well, I wasn't going to say that. I was very conceited. No, but I've been around long enough to have an opinion on things.
You also do have this astonishing show business history. You were an extremely high-flying agent. Your first job, I think, was with the father of James and Edward Fox, who was who was a doyen of agents. So your little black book, as it were, must have been the envy of Fleet Street.
I was very lucky. Robin Fox and his partner Laurie Evans had this agency which was called London International, and then became ICM, so it's still going, but not them, sadly. And they showed me their client list. The first day in the office, these people would come in, these famous people,
the knights,
famous
the
stars.
knights,
They've all the knights. Lawrence,
Johnny, Larry,
Ralphie, they were all there. And then Johnny Mills, who then became Sir Johnny, and Kenny Moore, they were all there. And my mother, who wanted me to be a barrister, and when I said I wanted to be a theatrical agent, she said, oh, that's going to be so disappointing. I wanted you to be a barrister.
You got a refund on the school fees.
Yeah.
Stuart Granger came in, and she completely changed her mind. She said, not the Stuart Granger. I said, no, Mother, the other Stuart, the window cleaner Stuart Granger. Yes.
And this is how the podcast works.
Have you worked out that the podcast is really just a vehicle for him to wheel out all his old theatrical anecdotes?
But they are wonderful theatrical anecdotes. As a former gossip columnist, I wish I'd made your acquaintance 30 years ago. The whole path of my career could have been different if I'd been taking you out for lunch on a regular basis. What I need to know, though, because people have seen you on Travels with My Father with Jack, and I think, albeit that you were transplanted to exotic locations, it was fairly clear that the badinage was probably identical to what it would have been like if the cameras hadn't been there.
100%.
I presume with the podcast, the microphone is
the same,
incidental, isn't it, with you two?
Exactly. I mean, it's theatrical anecdotes. It's a word you've used twice this morning, which we're banned from using by our children, i.e. parental banter.
Is it?
And you've
Yes.
used the word banter twice this morning.
I have.
Yes.
I apologise for that. Someone's been counting, but this is what it's like in Chateau White, Shea White.
It's just banter, really.
Parental
That's
banter.
why it's so diverse.
We've been married for 37 years, so we've argued about pretty much everything. So
And these are the experiences you bring to bear on the advice element of the podcast.
Absolutely.
We're going to ask Michael this question, but I suspect you'll answer it, which is a neat reversal to how we opened this little interview. How can people get hold of this podcast, Michael Whitehall?
on the interweb.
Oh yes, you go onto the interweb and dial it, and then you get it, I think.
What is it? 0800 The Wittering Whitehalls.
It's the Wittering Whitehalls at gmail.com. There you go.
Well played. That's how you get in touch, and then you can download it from Global Player. Archie's been in touch to say this couple should have their own show, which makes me wonder what we've just been doing for the last 10 minutes. They do. It's called the Wittering Whitehalls, and you can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Michael Hillary, thank you so much.
James, thank you so much. Lovely to see you.
That's it from me for today. If you missed any of the programme, you can of course listen back on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, including the Wittering Whitehalls. As well as full disclosure, download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now.
I can tell you that's the first time he's ever enjoyed reading that last bit out. I can confirm.
Talk about double pleasure. Sheila Fogarty and James O'Brien.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. Thank you. Do you know he had a haircut specially for your visit?
Stop it.
Yeah, doesn't do that for me or any other guests, just you two. Anyway, from one, which is probably now after my wittering, racism and sport. Football is in the spotlight today. We've seen it all before with cricket, haven't we, recently? The FA has revealed a string of offensive racial remarks by John Yems, but it was still concluded that the former Crawley manager is not a conscious racist. So let's talk about what that might be. At 2, I want to talk about the gender recognition bill in Scotland and Westminster's veto of it. It triggered clashes in the Commons that I think reflect the big problem with the whole debate on gender across the board. Nobody seems to be listening to each other, but we'll start with strikes. There are more to come, and they're getting more coordinated.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, all police forces are being asked to check their officers and staff against national police databases. The Home Office wants to identify anyone who has slipped through the net in the wake of the case of PC David Carrick. The 48-year-old admitted to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape across 2 decades. Rishi Sunak has addressed the case during Prime Minister's questions.
The abuse of power is truly sickening, and our thoughts are with his victims. The police must address the failings in this case, restore public confidence, and ensure the safety of women and girls. There will be no place to hide for those who use their position to intimidate those women and girls, or those who have failed to act to reprimand and remove those people unfit from office.
The Home Secretary says Ukraine has lost a leading light following the death of the country's Interior Minister. Denis Monastyrsky was among 18 people killed in a helicopter crash in Kyiv. 3 children were among those killed when it came down in foggy conditions close to a nursery. People in London could be hit with the biggest transport and council tax rises in a decade. Mayor Sadiq Khan says he's got no viable alternative. It means from March, the daily pay-as-you-go cap on the tube will increase by 30 pence. Ambulance staff across 8 trusts in England and Wales have announced 4 more strike dates. GMB union members will take action on the 6th and 20th of February and again on the same dates in March. Thousands of nurses across England have walked out in their pay dispute today. Mark is a community mental health nurse at the Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. He's spoken to LBC.
We've got wards that you can't open sometimes because you haven't got enough staff. It's incredibly difficult to get people to do this job. They can get paid a lot more going elsewhere and doing a lot less stressful work. So I feel almost forced to be out on strike. I don't think that any of us want to be here.
The government has repeatedly called their calls for a pay rise unaffordable. And falls in petrol prices mean inflation in the UK